Hello, flute friends. I'm Matthew Allison of PracticeFlute.com, a flute and yoga instructor with more than 2 decades of being interested in holistic musicianship. I'm excited to highlight an inspiring teacher in this interview series, Breath as the Great Connector. In this conversation, I'm joined by internationally acclaimed flutist and certified Reiki master, Nina Assimakopoulos, who is flute professor at West Virginia University. Nina is an integrative performing artist whose work encompasses traditional and exploratory forms of flute playing that combine music with movement, multimedia arts, and eco performances, integrating handcrafted world flutes and instruments made from organic materials with narration and storytelling. Hi, Nina.
Hi, Matthew. I'm admiring this incredible aura that I'm seeing behind you. It's like plant life coming out of your head. It's beautiful.
I love being surrounded by life and energy and green and as much nature as possible. So I've brought about 44 plants into my house to try to make that feel a little bit more connection that way. And I
Wow.
love seeing you and the aura that shines just from you in general.
Aw. Well, I know that we appreciate each other. We've bumped into each other at so many NFA conventions and followed each other on social platforms and talked for a while about maybe even doing a summer course together on flute and wellness and health. So it's awesome to be having this opportunity to talk about this important topic of injury and identity and transformation through that. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Now, there are quite a number of flute players these days who are talking about musicians' injuries. And one of the reasons why I was most drawn to you is because you also like to talk about it from an internal or energetic point of view, rather than just the muscle injury or just the joint or whatever might be happening. And I think that's an important part of the conversation that we need to highlight. So that way, when we begin to heal from an injury or when we are practicing avoiding injury, we can look at our entire selves. And you have a lot of experience in that kind of reflection. So, can you tell us a little bit about being a Reiki master?
Yeah, so I actually have always been very interested in um, energy work, and I started with doing some study of that 18 years ago and passing some certifications. And as I went through the certification channel, I realized it's a modality. It comes with a certain set of movements and things that you do, but really, in essence, that energy is absolutely everywhere. It's in our flute playing. It's in every breath that we take. The ability to self heal or self regulate, to share light and life, and uh, you know, love and passion with others. All of that is energy. It doesn't have to be a Reiki thing. So yeah, I actually do energy work, and I do a lot of things with sound healing, using crystal singing bowls and also tuning forks that are tuned to really interesting, very low frequencies or high frequencies. And most importantly to our conversation, I'm a flute player. And I think that those of us who are drawn to the flute are drawn because of something that's in the essence of the instrument. And I can't imagine, for example, being a pianist, just sitting at an instrument. And I'd be grateful for feeling the vibrations coming at me and feeling them move through my fingertips and the bones. But there's something about the flute that for sure has drawn me, and that is that ability to just infuse it with life through the breath and sort of sing and find your voice through the instrument. And we have so much potential as flute players to really see our practice as a way to self-regulate, increase our energy. And that's through the breath of the instrument, the actual vibration of all the pitches that we have literally at our fingertips. And so I like, exploring this sort of holistic approach to flute playing.
And I love that you were used words like vibrate because we are just molecules held together, but like every other molecule in the universe, vibrating. And as musicians, we get to, I guess, control or manipulate or be part of creating harmony through that vibration. And that can be creating sound and music, which is what most of us think about, but it can also be about that other kind of connection. So, vibration is a great connector, and breath is a great connector because it's how we are going to be working with vibration and sound and energy as musicians. So, I love that
Yeah.
you've brought those keywords up already.
Yeah, and everything that we do is vibration, and not just flute, playing the flute or playing the violin, but like every word we speak has an impact. Even if no one's around, sound never dies. Once you set vibration into motion, it just goes. And I love thinking about that, even in terms of the intention that we put into our sound when we play, when we're performing. Are we sending love through the instrument? Are we caring for our audiences? Are we, serving as a channel for them to experience something at a deeper level? What is the intention behind our breath? What is the intention that we are putting into the instrument, through the instrument of our own bodies? And we walk around all day doing that, whether we're aware of it or not. But the flute is a great tool for seeing that in a material realm and hearing it in a material realm and experiencing it as performers in that way, how we navigate vibration and intention and goodwill and the willingness to touch ourselves and our audiences.
Well, and hopefully throughout our conversation, we'll get to expand on this a bit more. But the energy that we put into ourselves when we're alone in our practice room does carry with us when we go into the rest of the world. So that is something that is also powerful for us to think about. Is the our energy is shared even when we've stopped doing whatever the activity was, whether it was practicing Tafnelo Gobert or doing a yoga session or meditating on the ground or watching TV on the couch. That energy does stick with us for a while. So, um,
Yeah. And people can sense it, and so if you practice and you leave your practice session totally energized and you've, like you've upgraded your vibration for the day through your practice and go grocery shopping, people are impacted by that. They can sense it and the way you radiate, the way you smile. Your students can sense it, your colleagues, your friends. So how amazing that we have this instrument to do this to ourselves with, as a tool for healing, for vibration, for health and wellness. And yeah, it's wonderful. And injury can be something that steps in the way of that experience because going through a playing injury can be a very painful thing because in a sense you lose your voice for a time period. Potentially, it depends on how it is for most people.
and today's topics will mostly be focused around injury, identity, and transformation. We'll be discussing that compound subject, including questions that we received from the audience. But I'm also a bit curious before we get into that, if you can tell us a little bit more about what you're working on and what you mean by eco performances.
Yeah, so this is cool because it's kind of a result of it comes out of my experience with a personal injury, which I look forward to sharing about with the flute that put me in a place where I literally had to go through a very deep transformation in terms of my identity as a flutist and performer and professional and person and artist. And what came out of that was a new voice in so many ways, like on an esoteric level and on a physical level. And the physical part of that was that I started playing on these wooden flutes, and I was gifted with this beautiful flute by Jim Akins of Raven Bear Flutes, and the wood had been struck by lightning, and he gifted me this flute, and that became the impetus for my story, The Legend of Sky Woman, which is a story about a sky being who falls from the sky in her quest for wanting to capture the sounds of the earth so that she could weave them into her songs. And in order to gather those sounds, she had to go through a great period of darkness and transformation where she went through a forest and lived without sound. She was mute, she couldn't speak. And during that time, she collected herbs and plants and waited for this transition to happen. And in the end, a raven appeared and gave her a flute that was struck from a tree that was struck by lightning. And when she blew through the flute, the worm spirit that was in her throat disappeared, and she was able to make a sound. And through that new sound, she entered this ability to create what is called in my story a sound magic, and that wove the darkness and the light. And so in creating that short story and then setting it to music, which took about, the whole project took about 200 hours. It's for fixed media and soundscape, global instruments, organic instruments from the forests here in West Virginia and the rivers as well, and flutes that I had handcrafted out of wood. Through that experience of wanting to just let this piece come out of the substrate from my own experience and create this piece, I really truly discovered my new love for playing on wooden flutes, global flutes, and handcrafting these out of instruments and out of wood that is from West Virginia timber, repurposed wood, and more recently driftwood. And I have an example. So this is a flute that I'm making right now out of a piece of driftwood. And I have to put a piece here, but it's hollowed out. And so I'm really looking into this whole driftwood flute thing and exploring shapes like that. And then here's another example of a flute that I made out of spalted birch. And I'll just play a couple notes for fun. So these flutes play a part in the Sky Woman, Legend of Sky Woman story, and another story set to music that I'm writing right now. Eco performance is tied into the environment, the trees, the watersheds, and how those elements weave into the storytelling that I do when I perform on these flutes.
And has the concept of eco performance, natural flutes, had an impact on the way that you think of healing or injury and these topics of energy that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I can't say that it hasn't had an impact necessarily. I just feel like it's all in flow with this current that I've been traveling on and traveling through, which has really, coming to the topic of identity, helped me understand myself more as a sound artist than just a flute player. And I think that the silver flute, for so many years, with 6 hours of practice, 9 hours of practice, the Mozarts, the Eberts, all the traditional playing, was such an amazing, walking stick, almost a travel mate through the earlier parts of my career and my life as a student, with so much passion, practicing and learning those pieces. And eventually the voice became a little too small for me. And I found myself wanting to, merge into something bigger, wanting to let something bigger emerge from me. And so I would say the whole eco performance environment, making of these wooden flutes, combining them with the silver flutes and global flutes is really for me just this trajectory of, like, I don't know, it's like a ray of light that just keeps expanding, and all of that has just come into my life path.
And I appreciate that you're bringing up how this affects your identity as a musician and as just a flutist, because I know that many of us in the flute community struggle with feeling like what we are or what we were doing is enough. And there's ways of discovering what is enough for us. And it sounds like you're going to have a story to share that's going to be quite inspiring in that way. Um,
Yeah.
in the topic of injury, identity, and transformation, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with personally with injury, or your experiences with your students with injury?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was just telling a friend of mine last night that this is my first, like, public, other than in performance, where I have been talking about my journey, especially when I perform The Legend of Sky Woman. I always preface it with the fact that it's an allegory and an homage to human transformation, and an allegory of my own journey. But this is like the first interview where I'm able to speak about this and share it with the public, which is really cool. And when I was going through the injury, I wasn't ready to speak about it. And I knew that there would come a time, because I thought to myself, when I come through this fingers crossed because I didn't even know if I would. I hope that I can be in a place one day where I can actually use this experience to bring hope and, I don't know, wisdom or perspective or some kind of support for people who are going through playing injuries. For me, it was in many ways one of the most painful things I've ever gone through emotionally. And it was the most painful thing I've ever gone through artistically, for sure. My story is that when I was 14, I was gifted by my parents with a very lightweight flute, which is what they were making in the 80s. The walls of the flutes were thin walled. And I played on that flute until I was like, I don't know, 40, 45 or 48 or something like that. And at some point in towards the end of what I'm describing is that period of time, I decided to switch to a heavy wall flute. And the flute was quite heavy. And I loved the sound when I initially picked the flute up. And I think, but then I found out that after I began to practice on the flute, if I hit the 2 hour mark or the 3 hour mark of playing, I couldn't get a good sound anymore. And I thought it was something about me and adjusting to the instrument. So then I went on a quest to like watch myself in the mirror and make sure I was lined up properly. And I hyper focused on my embouchure. I noticed it was slightly crooked and I wondered if I should fix that. And like, no, 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 never do anything like that, especially without any kind of like safety net or guidance. And so what happened in the course of that is not only did I develop, and this is all sort of self-diagnosed, embouchure collapse syndrome, where my muscles became so fatigued from playing on this instrument and trying to navigate the new positioning. But in addition to that, I broke something neurologically because it was like people who they say that if you focus on your golf stroke a certain way too much, or people who are shooting basketball, if they're like hyper focused in a certain way or thinking about the mechanics of their arm, that they can actually move out of flow with that part of your neurology that knows how to do something without thinking. And so there's a phrase now that's out there called musician's dystonia, which is different from focal dystonia. And I didn't know about that phrase until like 4 months ago. And so up until that point, I always kind of thought that maybe I had focal dystonia as it's used in a loose term and not in its true medicinal term. So yeah, so that's what happened. And I wasn't able to play. I couldn't remember how to shape my lips. I was confused. It was scary. It was painful because my voice, the thing that I loved the most, tone colors and depths of sound, it just eluded me and disappeared. And so for 6 months, I didn't play hardly very much. Every time I picked the instrument up, it was a very painful experience for me, emotionally and spiritually. And I went through a series of trying out many different kinds of flute weights and flutes. And I don't consider myself completely over it. I think that I've learned to hold hands with it. I perform now. I'm back on track, but it was quite a painful journey, and I would say the bulk of it lasted for 2 years. Very difficult time.
And when you talk about fear and some of these other powerful emotions that came up during it, I'm one who believes that there's parts of us that are these things. So there's a part of me that is fear that tends to go, when those parts are quite present, it's easy for us to lose contact with other parts of our identity or parts of self that we might want to be putting out there. One of the things I thought was impressive is that you still had a part that was thinking of others or caring for others, where you thought this is a learning experience that I'm going to be able to
Yeah,
share.
yeah.
When you were, and and you've expressed that it's still continuous, you're holding hands with it, but when you were feeling that fear and unable to play the way that you wanted it to play, was that the biggest pull from sense a self identity, or are there other factors going in there as well?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love what you said about parts, and I really did feel that very real. Like a part of me was like the taskmaster, like you're going to get over this and you're going to practice and now you're going to make sure you do, like you're going to practice 20 minutes a day in 10-minute increment. I don't know. Like I was just, and so I had my taskmaster self and that part of me that was like, here's how you're going to move through this. And then there was this like wounded part that was like, my sound is gone and I can't pick up the flute without crying. And then there was my professional part that still, was showing up for engagements and the incredible courage that it took to like perform when all of this was going on in my head um, and even demonstrate for students picking up the instrument and going to demonstrate and then like the sound wouldn't be there. It was just, oh my God, it was so painful and concerning. And so these parts were all very active and that created the chaos and confusion. And then there's like this part that's like trying to navigate like, so I think that making a safe space for yourself when you're going through something like this and having a support system is really important. I actually forgot what part of your question was. Can you repeat what part of it was? I went on a little parts rampage.
Actually, I think you did pretty well with that, and we'll come back to maybe some of these thoughts too when we talk about prevention and also healing. So when you were talking about your injury, you talked about it in at least two parts. You talked about collapse of the embouchure, which seems physical, but then you also talked about feeling a break neurologically, which is more mental.
Yeah,
Um, Injury seems like it's a lot more complex than just hurting a muscle or fatiguing something.
yeah.
What is injury?
I'm another great question. This is such an important question because so injuries can be visible and they can be invisible. And so if you're running around with a cast on your arm, I was like, oh, hope you get better soon or whatever. But invisible injuries are interesting because you can hide. You can hide your injury, or even if you're not intentionally hiding it, it's not visible to everybody. So in terms of this type of injury that I was experiencing, there was this component of invisibility. And then on top of it, there was this physicality to the injury. There was a neurological component, there was a mental and psychological component, and there was a spiritual component because my flute was my spiritual voice. We're so interwoven with our instruments. It is truly a voice, especially if you've played, once went back and tried to like figure out how many hours I had practiced. And this was maybe 20 years ago, I had done this math, and it was something like 48,000 hours that I had played the flute and practiced. And so it's like fascia, it's like completely interwoven with our essence on all these levels. And so one of the things that I experienced with the injury was that the healing process was like like sort of the bar graphs in every one of these components was progressing at its own rate. Physiologically, I healed faster as soon as I stopped pushing myself to play on a heavy instrument and practice extensively. Everything healed up. But then I was dealing with like the neurology of like having broken some kind of connection with the flow of what my muscles knew they needed to do without me giving them attention. And the internal components of like emotional, spiritual, and even the psychological components of it, those took a lot of time to heal. And there was no rushing that healing at all.
So the other part that we've been talking about is identity. Why the identity component? What can happen there for musicians when we think about identity and our identity or identities in music?
Yeah, I included identity in the topic of our conversation today because especially as a teacher, um, and and just having gone through this life journey myself, but being in touch with all the seasons of life. So I've got young students and I've got, high school age students, and I have the college, university age students into their 30s. I even have, students who are adult amateurs. I myself, I'm 55, so I'm at that season of my life and that stage of my life. I have peers who are older.
Mhm.
And I really do think that there is this journey that we take with our instruments. It's actually such a beautiful thing. and the journey is like, it's like the fool's journey from the tarot deck, or the archetypal journey of like, inception and interest in and falling in love with something, and then you go through this warrior phase where you're like working hard to develop skills and have your conquests, so to speak, and then maybe you go through this dark night of the soul phase, like I did with my injury, where something crashes and burns, and then you have this phoenix rising stage where out of the ashes comes this new self of yours, this new voice. And so in terms of identity, one of the things that I think is very natural for us, especially in our earlier seasons in life, is because we're trying so hard to achieve our goals and make it so that we can do this thing we love, be a flute player, be a professional musician. We really do identify very strongly with that component of our work and who we are. We are flute players, we are violinists, we're classical musicians, we're whatever. And that's natural and normal and healthy, part of different seasons of life. And in the process of doing that, we're also trying to find our place in the world, like you would as someone in adolescence. Where How do I fit? Where's my place? How do I line up? How do I fit in? Will I be able to do this thing I love? And then what can also become part of that is what I like to call like nouning ourselves, like this concept that we are a flutist. So now you know, we've nouned ourselves. We're going to be this noun, right? Flutist, or I am a professional musician, or I am this or that. And all of this can kind of turn into this ball of attachment, which is not necessarily unhealthy until it becomes unhealthy. And that is what injury or going through any kind of life transformation can really help break down. It can help break down your connection to this identity and help you look internally to seeing the bigger picture of who you are, your purpose, what it is you want to bring to the earth and others. And so that's kind of why I included this sort of identity part of it. It's it would be great for everybody to go through that process of I'm a flutist, I'm a this and that, and then to start thinking more broadly, in terms of like, well, what are the other things that I am, and how do they line up in terms of importance in my life?
I am is an important conversation that I have in my yoga classes and with yoga students. And with that conversation, I do a little bit of thinking of my own. Culturally, I would say, I am Matthew. Where when sometimes I work with other people in other cultures, they say, I am called Matthew. As a
Mhm.
musician, flute player, is it healthier to pull that onto ourselves, or might it be healthier to consider it as being a part of, rather than saying, I am a flute player, say, I play the flute, or something along those lines, or I work as a flutist or a musician. How
Yeah, I
does
love
it
it.
affect that overall energy that we have?
Yeah, I love it. I am called flutist. I love that. Yeah, so I really love that. I mean, we are in essence flute players, and we are, after, like I said, it's like fascia. After all of that weaving of time and energy and sound and the experience of making sound and breathing, we really are flutists, and we really are sound artists, and we really are vibrational artists, and we really are pulmonary athletes. I mean, we are so many things. So I think it's just a matter of like, well, what do we mean when we say we're a flute player? And at different points in our process, that might mean, well, I'm really good at this thing, and because I'm good at it, it means I'm worthy and I have worth. And so it's like what we attach to this thing is like where it's sort of what needs to be explored. And that's where transformational life experiences can break us down in a way that's needed. And one thing I would love to say about injury is that one of the many things I'd like to say about it is there's such an opportunity for growth. And if you can really hold yourself in that space and be so present with the process and the pain of it and the grieving and the fear and the concern and the not knowing what you can do to change it. If you can be so present in that, when that time comes through, you will be transformed. And what comes out after is something so much better.
Yes, yes, beautiful. And along that, I guess identity and nouning. Um, are there any reasons why you would recommend against that? And I suppose that question comes from a fear of those who experience injury and aren't able to resume their life as a flute player the way they knew it before. If we hold on to that noun tightly, or if we shape that noun into being one specific image of what that should look like, that could be additionally traumatic or hard to work through or hard to work with, I guess, holding hands with that. So how can that identity um, be shaped in a way that will help rather than hinder progress past an injury or progress with or through that injury?
Yeah, I would say from my experience, just understanding that really the point of the process is letting go. It's letting go of attachments that no longer serve you. And that's different for everybody. In my case, I feel like the injury truly served a purpose of expanding my voice. And if it weren't for that experience, if it weren't for the gift of that lightning struck flute, I wouldn't be using my voice in the way I'm using it. And I grew in compassion too. I think as flute players, as any kind of highly trained anything, but especially musicians, where you go into a lesson and you're critiqued and you begin to develop your own internal critique. Oh, my sound is this. Oh, my fingers need to move more clearly. All of that has to happen to become a master and to develop mastery. And so you develop this critique, this inner critique, and then you go to concerts and that voice is still going. And I remember when I was in school, once going to a concert with a friend who was not a musician, and during the concert, I remember just listening with such a critical ear, which again was, I give myself grace because that was part of that season in my life. And I was learning how to be a critique and not really enjoying the concert. And my friend, who was not a musician, was like, oh my God, that was so inspiring and it was amazing. And I remember feeling sad. I was like, where did that go for me? How come I wasn't inspired? Why didn't I think that was amazing? And so I think that it's really important to see the transformational experience and your identity and know for you what the nugget of gold is in that experience. And if your identity is connected to worth, like I practiced this much, I worked hard, I got this scholarship, I won these competitions, I am worthy, you know, I am this, then that's where the change has to come in because that's not healthy. We're all way more than what we do in that regard.
I,
And
I appreciate that statement about finding that balance between the parts of us that are critical and then the parts of us that enjoy, because it almost feels to me that through you know 3 degrees, I was trained to focus on the critical part, and
yeah,
it was hard to enjoy music as a performer, but especially as an audience member. I would go
yes,
in with that critical ear, and that became part of my identity is the ability to like I needed the ability to critique to discern, but then I owned that as being a stronger part of my identity than was enjoyable or a part of myself. Those voices were quite loud. When you were living with the injury, were you changing the definition of your noun, or were you adding more nouns into your identity?
I love that. Um, I wasn't really changing my identity in that way.
Did the word flutist or flute player mean something different to you at that time?
Um,
Or were you still seeking what that ideal definition would have been?
yeah, I mean, I've been involved in so many other things than the flute that um, long before the injury, I have already kind of not just seen myself only as a flute player. I mean, I'm a mom, I'm, into like rock climbing and kayaking. So like this whole concept of what we do is not necessarily how we noun ourselves. I think I had left that behind way long before the injury. But for me, what the hardest thing was, it was actually literally losing my voice as an artist. And so it's like if you're a painter and you end up on an island with no canvas and no paint, it's like how do you self-express? And so, and even as I'm saying this right now, I think I'm having a beautiful revelation. And that is that like, well, so you have this medium and your medium is sound and your tool, your brushes are the flute. That's how you deliver your internal artistic voice. It's how you bring it into the world through this instrument. And then it's gone. And so then you're mute and you have all of this artistry and all of this artistic desire. None of that has changed. That's still a part of who you are, how you that you want to self-express, but your tool is missing. That's how it was for me. And so then it becomes, well, how do I do this? Okay, well, yeah, I'll paint or I'll do some other things, but I miss doing it through sound. And I think so for me, it was more that type of journey. And I would say that I think that if we do many things, we can find pleasure in them, but it is this act of attaching worth, or believing in your own PR, like any of that kind of stuff attached to the different things that we do is what we have to be most mindful of. And that's where that transformation occurs with maybe shifting our understanding of our identity.
Mm. So the journey has been quite quite a process for you. What other kinds of transformation did you go through in your experience with your injury? Um, what word would you share for those going through the process now, advice or help along the way?
Yeah, I would just say that it takes so much strength to go through a transformational experience like that, any kind of life transformation. And and you need certain tools for that journey. First of all, you need some sort of support. Um, you know, I don't know, through a therapist, through a wisdom keeper, somebody, friends, family.
Dedicated friend or partner, virtual groups now, online support
Yeah.
therapies.
And so understanding that you need support, then understanding that, so it takes strength. And so you need nourishment and you need like the tools for that journey. And so that comes through support from others. It can come through taking a break, like saying, I'm not going to play for 6 months, or I can't, it can be a physical, like having doctor and PT, physical therapy, whatever the injury is. And then being really aware that the injury is so multifaceted, this type of life transformation or transformational experience or the injury is multifaceted. It's not just physical, physiological. If it's this heartfelt, this deep, like not being able to express through an instrument, then you've got the spiritual journey that you're going through. You have a psychological component, which is that voice in your head that's like, oh, will I ever get better? What's gonna happen with my job? You've got the psychological journey, a neurological journey, the emotional journey. There can be a grieving involved, especially if it's something more protracted and you don't know that the end is in sight. The grief can be so intense. That's how it was for me, a deep, deep grieving. And when you're going through grieving, um, the importance of staying with that process and being there to cry, to find time to cry, to learn how to soothe yourself, to feel the waves of grief rise and fall and start to know the patterns of grief. And then there's the importance of hope, like knowing that, again, even with identity, that like this experience might mean that you can never play professionally again, or it could mean that you'll never play the same again. with those different components lined up. Maybe physically you will, but maybe you'll always have a little like voice in your head. So psychologically, you're not the same. You're completely transformed when you go through something like this. And so I would just say it's a very painful, challenging journey, and you need tools, and you need to understand that the journey has all these different components, and you need to be present for the journey, and then believe in the beauty of the journey, because it is there in your life for a reason, and it will produce fruit. It will really bring about something different and new, and you can trust that that is the truth. So that's what I would say.
And you do a very wonderful job of articulating holding hands with the injury as you move through it. And I think all of the parts of that injury, not just the direct ones, but the fear is part of the aftermath. And that fear is something that wants to protect us from overreaching again and injuring ourselves again, or fear of, you know, not feeling successful on the stage, which could affect our income or career. That fear is going to be present, and it's not meant to hurt us. It's meant to help us. Like, I don't think fear or those other emotions that we give negative context to are bad. They're there for a reason. Um,
Right.
it, do you have any ways that you could talk about holding hands with all of those emotions and all of those um, feelings and parts of yourself that others might sometimes see as getting in the way of healing or moving forward or transforming?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, two things popped to my mind. So I'm just going to put a post-it note over here. One is breathing and the diaphragm. So if you could remind me about that. And the second is this question that came in, which we'll be getting to: how do you avoid injury? And I remember when I read the question, which was just a couple days ago, I was like, and everybody wants to know, how do you avoid injury? And there's like a very basic question there that's important. How do you practice in a way where you don't injure yourself? But in the moment that I read that question, like a funny thought popped into my mind. I was like, maybe you don't want to avoid injury. And of course, I don't mean that like you want to avoid it, but like the word avoid struck me because I just thought of the beauty of like this whole experience for me and how it ended up working out. And so you're talking about fear, and so I think the key is we want to avoid things that are painful to us. We want to avoid fear, the fear of what that we're going through when we're in a difficult spot. We want to avoid the, you know, the sadnesses and the emotions that are not enjoyable. And that's normal to want to avoid them. I think the key is to be present with them,
Hmm.
and to make a space for that, even if it means I'm feeling this emotion come up right now at 5 o'clock today. I'm done work. That's when I go home and cry, and feel my fear and feel my emotions. And I think so. There's this balance, and it'll be different for everybody as they go through these challenges.
And that's important also to tie it in to those musicians and those in general who might be in some ways fortunate enough to not have experienced some kind of injury. Because even if you haven't had an injury, you're still going to experience fear. You're still going to experience worry or doubt or am I enough, or things along those lines. It just becomes maybe a little bit more present when you've had injuries like you have, or my physical trauma too, which is a different kind of thing, but brought all of those feelings to the forefront. It made me come to terms and made me look at those.
I
Um,
think one of the reasons we do what we do is because, as musicians, is because it's like a microcosmic way of being in a petri dish and having all of life's challenges right there. So, and that petri dish is music. It's your art. It's your mastery of what you're doing. And what happens in there? Well, you go to lessons and you're nervous, so you're dancing with courage. You go to a competition or an audition and you feel all these emotions come up, and you're dancing with courage, and you're dancing with the ability to concentrate, and you're exercising so much. It's like the flute, or your instrument as a musician gives you these incredible opportunities to develop these skills in your life that are life skills, but you're doing them with this little silver thing called the flute. And that's why and that's why it's sometimes nice to just pick up the flute, and I have one here, and just go, aren't you cute? Because it feels like, this intense, full of, it can be huge. It can feel like, oh my goodness, the fear, the courage, the concentration, the mechanics, the artistry, and it can just feel like this huge world. But in essence, it's just a little tool. It's quite light, very shiny and pretty. And behind this tool and attached to it with the fingers is you, a person.
Another word, and before I would
No?
definitely like to get to the breath and diaphragm because as a yoga person, you've
Yeah.
piqued my curiosity there. But um, I also would like to highlight a word that you said before that resonated with me, and that word is gratitude.
Yeah.
It was part of a longer sentence, and I was thinking, well, rather than focusing on fear, I can focus on the gratitude of I got to play for a while. I got to play for 20
Yes.
years, or I get to play today if we're fortunate to, or I get to do this because I did that before. There's a lot of opportunity for gratitude. And I try to think gratitude first thing when I open my flute case and last thing when I close it. And since since we were kind of talking about that, like literally in my flute case, I keep this little piece of paper that I pull out and read out loud. One of them, this my thought of the month is I seek connection, not perfection, because
Oh my God, I love that.
as one who like beat each other up, I like leaving little notes to remind myself to be grateful for the opportunity that I've had before, or the opportunity today to open this flute case, and whatever happens happens. And then when I put the flute away, still feel grateful. And that will help us when we go out into the world and share the energy with those people around us, like we're talking about. After you leave the practice room, your energy is going to linger when you're going into the grocery store or hopping on a train or whatever it might be. So that's great.
I love that. And every emotion has an antidote.
Mhm.
So when you think of fear, or even in performance, if you're about to walk out on stage and you're feeling self-conscious and maybe afraid, if that's the word you're going to use, what is the great antidote to that? It's service. It's like walk out on the stage and make your focus be touching lives. And a great antidote to fear is gratitude. So all of these energies and emotions have antidote energies and emotions, and that's part of navigating, learning how to navigate with vibration and energy as well.
And it's not that we're trying to exile or push away that fear. We're just also trying to remind ourselves to bring in the antidote and let them be in harmony together.
Yeah, and that's
That's
what
part of the vibrational beings, I guess.
yeah, and I love how you said exile, and that's what I meant by that word avoid, like how it kind of struck me as maybe you can't avoid everything, but how do you, like you said, how do you bring them into balance?
Hmm. Hey, fear, could you just help me not trip too many times when I go to the stand?
Hey, Fear, it's beautiful to see you again. Let me hold your hand while I also hold the hand of my courageous self,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Let's hold hands. Let's all be friends. We're all walking out on stage here. Fear, you can sit here on this chair right next to the pianist. You can turn pages. And courage and the desire to gift and touch lives through sound is going to be center stage. Thank you, Fear. And we'll resume our fear later. I'll give you more attention tonight. It's
You're
like,
not going anywhere. We've got a lifetime to spend together. Let's do this now.
exactly. It's a dance. It's dancing with courage, dancing with all of these elements.
All right, and now I'm going to reach for that post-it note that you stuck over on that side, I think.
Yeah, it's here.
Breath and diaphragm. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so something that you said reminded me of this. And there was a question that came in actually about injury and how it affects the breath. And we'll get to it in more detail. But it reminded me of, when you're injured or when you're afraid or when you're harmed, and this could be all kinds of harm, internal voices harming you, any kind of, actually getting hurt physiologically, physically, any kind of harm, the natural tendency for the body is to kind of, curl in and protect. And what happened for me with my flute injury was that I felt like I couldn't breathe anymore. Like, take a deep breath for the flute. I mean, I obviously went around breathing. And what I learned after some time was that my diaphragm had actually become more tight and not as flexible and malleable. And in part, maybe because I wasn't breathing regularly in the way that I do when I play. And so there came a point in time where I had to thank my diaphragm and literally put my hands right along the ridge and really reach in and send that part of my body gratitude. Thank you for what you did and what you felt like you needed to do to protect me emotionally as I went through this pain. I'm asking you now to release. Your work is done. Thank you. And so there was something you said about breathing and this question that came in about injury and breath that made me think of that.
Mm-hmm. Were there any specific practices of breath work beyond gratitude to the diaphragm and to breathing that you practiced when you were working through this?
Yeah, the breath has four phases: the inhalation, the suspension, the exhalation, and the recovery phase. And it's in the recovery phase where we're neither inhaling nor exhaling nor suspending the breath. And there's so much magic in that spot. There's profound magic there. You are not breathing in. You're not in the process of getting rid of breath, but you're completely still. Your body is landed. There's such a beautiful moment there. And that is a moment that we can be very afraid of. Like, we feel like I have to start breathing again. But if you can suspend that moment and even in breath work, navigate that feeling to want to inhale again, there is a kind of peace and centeredness that can come from that. And when I did that 150 hours underwater during COVID with the hydrology project, I was actually learning a lot of breath work technique with breath holds, and I managed to get up to 2 minutes and 7 seconds underwater holding my breath without taking a breath. And the art of that and navigating and training your body for that, so much of it has to do with that suspension of, I don't need to breathe. I can just sit here right there without inhaling or exhaling.
Mm.
And so any kind of breath work, I think, can really, be powerful for connecting with your body and specifically the diaphragm, but the power of your hands also to touch yourself, to give yourself energy and love. We're so disconnected from our own healing powers in our society. And so with that, I would put my hand in this part of my body and thank that part of my body and thank myself for my courage as I went through this journey.
As far as avoiding injuries, are there ways that we can practice or perform or behave that will help us avoid injury?
Yeah, I think really the bottom line is sensing inward and being always present to your own biofeedback. And that's where a teacher is so helpful. I work so much with my students on their alignment and making sure that they are able to answer the question, what do you sense? What am I feeling? What do you feel here? A lot of people come in with this marching band alignment, and there's all these, where their arms are over here. And so there's a lot of restructuring of alignment. So having the skill and being coached in a way that will get your alignment into an optimal position, making sure that everything is just, optimal. So nothing is stiff or sticking up or using energy in a way that's not needed. And then how you practice. So like in my studio, the students create practice training logs, and incorporating breaks is really important. Practice is not just having the flute up against your face. You can do tons of practice. I've spent many hundreds of hours practicing my flute without the flute anywhere nearby, just holding a pen, working out, fingerings, working on memory. So how you practice, what intention you bring into your practice, being self-aware, making sure that you're checking in on any holding patterns, things that would create tension. If you feel tension that's negative tension, maybe it's not from the flute, maybe it's from typing, maybe it's from how you're carrying your bag. Just being aware of all those elements really are very important in terms of, avoiding injury and um, even positively speaking, building up a sustainable way of doing something for thousands and thousands of hours that doesn't harm you.
And as you mentioned, bringing other things in is something that's hard to avoid. It could be a fight with our boss or a partner that has brought some kind of other tension in. It could be fear of a test we're about to take, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Do you recommend, or do you ever practice the breath work or a breath work component before you practice the flute to help release some of those holds, or physically?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in my book, like the first two units of the whole breath section are without the flute. So you know, we are our instrument. We play the flute, but it's us, and so any kind of approach where you are connecting to your body as the instrument, whether it's through breath work or through some kind of meditation or the affirmations like the beautiful one that you carry in your case, or even that experience of holding your case and being grateful as you assemble your flute, all of that really should be part of our practice. And I think later in this series, we're going to actually talk more about practice as a noun, as a spiritual practice with the flute.
That's great. How can personal emotional injuries manifest in our artistic processes?
Yeah, I love this question. It's from Juan Carlos Narvaez. Thank you so much, Juan, for sending this question in. Um, well, once again, our instrument is ourself, right? And the flute is just this tool. It's like a paintbrush, paints with sound. So anything flowing through us, the intention of our sound, the energy behind the sound that we're creating, even the way we're moving our bodies that day, anything comes through our sound. It comes through the way we interpret the music. It comes through what we hear in music, what parts of music touch us, what aspects of the music remind us of, what kind of visioning we see when we hear music. And so our journeys and our, personal emotional injuries are part of the fabric of who we are. And how we're navigating those is part of the fabric of who we are and part of the fabric of our actions while we're doing that. So if we're coming out of, say, an experience or conversation that is harmful, and we try to pick the flute up and practice, most of us will have experienced that there's like a block there, or maybe not. Maybe the flute becomes a respite. Maybe it becomes a sanctuary, a place away from that pain or that energy. But even then, everything is infused with, this essence of who we are and our life journeys and what we're going through. I remember this thing that Peter Lloyd said to me. Peter Lloyd, former principal flutist of the London Symphony. I studied with him for 4 years in my undergrad. And I was playing Daphnis, and he said, "Nina, one of these days when you've lived life longer, you'll play that differently." And I remember being like, me with my pigtails, what? It was awesome. And he always said things like that. Like he even said once, he's like, when you grow up, then you can do that sort of thing with the music. But for now, just follow the rules, because I was always wanting to like turn the phrase in different directions. But the point being that it's true. Our life, when we reach these sadnesses or we have these challenges or we have these hardships, like they're all part of who we are. And so how we turn a phrase, how we hear music, what draws us into the music, all of this becomes, part of our process and part of our output, part of the work that of our sound. And so, yeah, I embrace it, journey with it, and know that it's 100% individually you, what you bring to the table in terms of sound and artistry because of your individual life process. It's a beautiful thing.
When we face trauma or injury, what happens with our breath?
I think um, our breath changes all day long. It changes moment to moment. Even the circadian rhythm of which nostril we're breathing through, which side of our, nose is actually active, has been, researched and confirmed. Whether we're breathing through our mouth or whether we're taking our breath through the nose, which is stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, how deep our breath is, how shallow our breath is. Breath is everything. We come into this world with two superpowers. And when we're done, we let go of those superpowers. And one of them is the breath, and the other thing is voice. And so in terms of injury, anything we do, anything we hear, any kind of conversation we have, breath is a part of all of that. And when we go through injury or painful experiences, whether even if internal injuries or things that are being said, physical injuries that can be seen, invisible injuries, all of that absolutely affects the breath. I think in general, we will breathe more shallow. Sometimes breathing becomes more rapid, and can stay that way for prolonged periods of time. People can develop a way of breathing that's, very short and very quick. And if that goes unchecked, it can become part of a habit. So the main thing is that injury causes us to self-protect. That can cause us to bind. And then that's where the diaphragm and parts of your muscles can become more constrained. Your fascia can become tighter. And if that goes unchecked for prolonged periods of time, then you're dealing with another kind of injury and lack of access to that part of your mechanism. So yeah, it affects, absolutely, breathing affects, injury affects breathing, and staying in touch with your biofeedback throughout the whole process is absolutely key.